Hey, so it has been a good long while. Warhammer 3 has been out for nearly 3 months now, and I have not made a video saying what I think about it. Most of you probably don't care, and it's probably healthy that you don't care, but there may have been some wondering about it, because I did make a video for Warhammer 2 that was relatively popular, I guess, that like 30,000 views now, I think, so I wanted to make this video a lot earlier. I wanted to make this video pretty well as soon as the game came out. But other things have gotten in the way. But now I have a bachelor's degree, so things are not so much in the way. So, the short and simple version of my Warhammer 3 take, for those of you who are short on time, is that from a subjective perspective, I really like it. And I know that I'm going to absolutely adore it once Immortal Empires comes out, and more DLC comes out. Because I fucking loved Warhammer 2. And Warhammer 3, in all the ways that matters, is nothing but improvements. On an objective level, the game has some problems. And I think the problems have been overblown by a lot of the community. And I think that a lot of the problems are the kind of problems that you know will be fixed. So the current hoopla of, oh my god, Warhammer 3 is the biggest disappointment ever. This is worse than Rome 2. This is worse than Thrones of Britannia. This is worse than Empire at launch. You're entitled to not like the game. No matter what, you're entitled to not like the game. And there are reasons to not like the game. And the game has serious objective flaws. But all the flaws that I currently see in the game, at least for me, are problems that I can either fix through mods, quite simply, and I know that that's not much of a justification, that a game shouldn't need you to mod it to fix its issues. But, especially in a situation like what Total War has, with the Steam Workshop making modding so simple and easy, I don't see it as that big of an issue. And I mean, even then with games that are a bit more difficult to mod, like, let's say, a lot of people consider the Stalker games to be virtually unplayable without mods. But would you say you despise Stalker thoroughly and hate the series and you wish you could boycott the developers till the end of time? No, the Stalker games may have objective issues, but a lot of the people who play the Stalker games adore the Stalker games because, with mods, they're wonderful. And I'd say this is a much less severe case than that. It's mostly just small bugaboos that need to be solved here. But either which way, that's the short and simple, or at least as short and simple as I can make it, take on it. But I wanted to also get into a bit more detail, I guess, and go over some individual matters that I think are particularly relevant. And for that, I think I'll actually try and edit together this video, which is unusual for me. I tend to just make a slap shot, one cut, whatever works, go kind of recording. But for this one, especially because Total War Warhammer tends to have such long loading times, I don't think that's reasonable. And it's better to divide it up into chapters anyways. I can even divide it up into chapters on YouTube, which is something I've never done and I'm going to have to figure out how to do, but hey, that'll be fun. Learning is always fun. Variety is the spice of life. But, just to kick it off, I guess I should go ahead and say, I do definitely want to go over each of the races, except for generic Demons of Chaos, as I have not put a real campaign in as them. Every other race I have put some decent amount of time into, not the Demon Prince. I have not put much time in as him. So, that one, I can't really say. I hear it's a brutal one. I hear it's a fun one, because you can mix up all the different demon buildings and such. But I can't really say. And with that said, I guess I'll move on to whichever one I want to record next. As soon as I hit that cut button. Just for the sake of transparency, I do want to have this little section where I go over the mods that I use, because that does kind of inform my perspective on things. And there are some issues that were issues at launch that I had, but I was able to solve through mods, and so my perspective on those things can be different because those issues I'm just not dealing with. And so I come out with a bit more of a positive opinion than I otherwise might have, especially if I made this video like on the week of release. So just quick, I have Calm's Nobblar reskin to make the Nobblars look more like they do in the lore. I think the Nobblars look fine in the vanilla game, but they don't look quite like the Nobblars should. One of Chaos Roby's delightful little unit mods. I'll just go ahead and skip over the rest of the unit mods I have, just because they're not so relevant. And I haven't actually used them in campaign yet. I've mostly just been playing around with them in custom battles. But better camera mod, it's mandatory. UI performance patch, because the amount of lag spikes you get from opening up menus is just weird. Warhammer 2, I think, had that problem a little bit, but in Warhammer 3, it seems to be stronger. Mixed with Legendary Lords, skip over that. And on top of that, no Lightning Strike. I thought that one of the best changes Warhammer 3 made to campaign balance was getting rid of Lightning Strike. I know it's great for people who love cheesing, but cheesing is not my way, and it bugs the hell out of me when the AI uses it on me. I think the current system of having armies come in like a minute or two late into the battle is much more interesting and feels a lot more strategic. There's a lot more to do in situations where you were outnumbered, and there's a lot more issues in situations where you outnumber the opponent, but the opponent might have the initial advantage. Tabletop caps, mandatory. Absolutely mandatory. I am not a cheeser, like I said, but when you get into the late game, there's too much motivation to pick a stack of nothing but bloodthirsters, right? Because the AI is going to be building stacks of nothing but elemental bears or nothing but great unclean ones, so you have to keep up in the arms race. Tabletop caps not only encourages you to build your armies, or forces you to build your armies in a lot more lawful way, it also forces the AI to build its armies in a lot more lawful way. I think tabletop caps is great because you can still have a bit of a tech advantage if you get to the later buildings earlier than your opponents, but at the same time it ensures that even when you get into the late game, for one thing, the lower tier units are not just disappearing. You're still going to see Empire Spearmen on turn 100 or something. They're not extinct. And it just makes the game a lot more interesting, rather than it just being, let's have our top tier units butt heads until one of us wins. Toggle Chaos Realms by Drunk Flamingo. I believe Tabletop Caps is also... Yeah, Tabletop Caps is also by Drunk Flamingo. Good guy. Toggle Chaos Realms... Yeah, they're the #1 issue of the game. Not so much now, I believe, since they've changed them and added the mechanics of, like, garrisons delaying them. But even then, I haven't turned Chaos Realms back on since the mod released. I played through that campaign once, beat it so that I could get Boris and get Be'lakor, but since then I've had my fun with it and I'm not interested in it. Being able to teleport around the map is cool, but it's not worth all the other issues that come with it. Anti-player bias remover, that one's another necessity. That one, anti-player bias is fun for Legendary, where the entire idea is you're facing an onslaught of every AI faction on the entire globe, but that's not my style. I like things to play out a bit more like they do in the lore, so I think it's silly that Constantine gets a whiff of Scarbrand and hops his ass over into the Chaos Wastes to get a piece of that action, and so on. So I think the anti-player bias remover is a necessity. Less buff and effect VFX 3, good for people who have performance issues, which I very much do with Warhammer 3, and also just good for making spells and leaders and so on look a lot less dumb, because I think it's silly that Lords and Heroes have little god beams coming down on them like Sigmar is favoring every single dude in the Lord or Hero rank of any army. Man-Eater variety, that one's just fun, from the Noblar variety one. Same thing, Noblar reskin. Makes the ogres feel a bit more like they should. Disable auto-resolve, that one is a personal thing. That is not really an issue with the game. That's just, I have a tendency to use auto-resolve too many situations, so I rarely, if ever, actually end up playing battles. That I have on, that mod I just have on, to force me to actually play the game. Because battles are fun, but there's some nagging part of my brain which tells me that if I play the battles myself, I'll be hobbling myself, which is sometimes true, but not always. No buildable towers. I'll get to that in a little bit. Well, probably a little bit longer, because I tend to be very long-winded. The Vassals fixing mod, necessity if you're going to play Slaanesh. Nice if you play any other factions that have access to Vassals, like Vampire Counts, though I don't think there are any factions other than Slaanesh that get access to Vassals right now. Console commands, that's just for cheating. I used that in my Nakari campaign, and I'll just openly admit this. I used that in my Nakari campaign to get rid of Scarbrand because I thought Scarbrand made the campaign too anxious. Sometimes I cheat. At the end of the day, I think the Nakari campaign is going to be a lot more fun once there are other Slaanesh Legendary Lord options. It's really awkward right now. You know what? I'm going to get into that when I get to Slaanesh. Reduced tower range, that's for the towers on walls and sieges. And the Allied Recruitment Cap Remover, which I think that Allied Recruitment is a lot of fun for making mixed armies. That one's not really an issue. That's just a thing of getting rid of some degree of balance. And like I said, ordinarily I don't like to cheese, but in that particular case, I just think it's cool. And with tabletop caps, it's not that bad because the tabletop caps will prevent me from playing as, let's say, Kislev, but allying a Norscan settlement and having an army of 20 mammoths or something insane like that. You know, obviously that mod without tabletop caps would be kind of unbalanced because you'd pick a race that wouldn't even have that strong of units like Bretonnia, but you take a doom stack of 20 steam tanks because you're friends with the Empire, right? But with tabletop caps, not so bad. And so I suppose the next segment I'll do is Kislev. So I was recording the later parts of this video when it occurred to me that I was kind of accentuating the negative. And as I said in the part before this, or maybe 2 parts before this, it's hard to keep track when I'm not editing yet. The game is, on an objective level, distinctly flawed. And there is a certain negative focus of the talks around it, which on some level I think is fair but overblown. But I wanted to go back and specifically talk about the 2 big reasons that I really am liking Warhammer 3 and know that I'll love it once the Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2 content gets added, which is the diplomacy and the sieges, which is not much of a surprise. Before Warhammer 3 came out, I think I'd been saying for a while that the 2 biggest problems with Warhammer 2 were diplomacy and sieges. But, nonetheless, decided, here we go, I'll have a segment for diplomacy and a segment for sieges, because those are the 2 biggest strong points of this game over Warhammer 2. And I chose Constantine here as the demonstration because he is at kind of a nexus point between Norska, Kislev, and the Empire here. Though I won't actually bother with doing many diplomacy deals because diplomacy is often a long-term affair, which is not appropriate for this kind of video that I'm doing here. But just as the example here, Constantine, starting out in contact with several Kislevite factions who all thoroughly despise him, okay. I guess that makes sense, he doesn't get along with the other ice witches. But looking at it just straight up from the screen already, there is one massive improvement, which is the quick deal button. Oh my god. The pain in the ass. Oh, hello, Theoderic Gausser. Forgot I had the Legendary Lord mod on. The pain in the ass that it was in Warhammer 2, and I'm sure Warhammer 1, though I didn't put any time into it, that was looking for who is going to give me a trade agreement? Who is going to let me have military access? Who is interested in talking with me at all? Are any of the factions of my race interested in confederation? That was a big pain in the ass in Warhammer 1 and 2, because you had to do this. Will you take a non-aggression pact? No? Okay. Will you take a trade agreement? No? Okay. Military access? No. And as you can see right there, in the one-on-one diplomacy, you no longer have to deal with the kind of gambling there of it being green, yellow, red. Oh, well, she's yellow for non-aggression pact, which means maybe, but I don't know what her conditions are to make that acceptable. Right? You don't know whether that's going to be an accept at all. So you don't know whether you can ask her for anything else. And you don't know how much you're going to have to invest to bump it up to where it's guaranteed without screwing yourself over too much. And you could tediously sit there and plug in, you know, whatever amounts of money. But ain't nobody got time for that. And that alone, just the numeric values there, is such a massive improvement. But of course, the other big improvement is actually the alliance mechanics, which I do not have turned on right now, actually. But I can cut to a save file where I do. So I will go ahead and do that, actually, so I get to cover that. So this is more of a late game Slaanesh playthrough. I'm not super far ahead for me to be 108 turns in. But nonetheless, I do have some allies and some vassals here where I can discuss the alliance mechanics a bit more properly. Like, here we've got the Bjornlings, who are my vassals, thanks to the seductive influence mechanic. There we go, yeah. And I can access the war coordination menu, which is so much nicer for making allies actually be helpful. And so I can go through, and of course I can always do the select target thing, which has always been there in Warhammer. Though now it's a lot more valuable because you can actually see what priorities your AI teammates have. Because let me just go ahead and click out of here. The Bjornlings might not have any armies, so I'm going to have to see what's going on with them. No, they don't have any armies. Good old AI teammates. However, I am allied with the Scalings, and so I can see old Thelman Ingerson here is set on going all the way over to the other side of Norska to attack the Ultra Spawns under good old Demon Prince, whatever his name is in this playthrough. I don't know, I don't care. So that alone, pretty helpful. But what's much more helpful is that you can go down and build an outpost in their lands, which allows you to recruit some of their units, and to take missions to increase your allegiance, which is the currency you spend on hiring some of their units. And also, if they had any armies free that weren't led by their faction leader, they could offer an army in exchange for a massive amount of allegiance. These are not surprises for anyone who's been playing the game or paying attention to the hype cycle, but I'm just reminding myself of them, honestly, on some level, because it has been a while since it's been finals week. It's been a while since I've got to play the game, really. And that really makes allies actually worthwhile, which is crazy, because in Warhammer 2, allies only held you down. So that is a big change that really changes diplomacy and makes diplomatic treaties actually meaningful and valuable. And that massively improves the game on its own, if you ask me. I know there are some people for whom the only value of AIs was to kill them. And if you watch Legend of Total War type videos and you're a big fan of his, then yes, your take probably is that diplomacy changes mean nothing because you're going to kill them anyways. And more power to you. In that case, I don't see any reason why you'd move on past Warhammer 2, because Warhammer 2 has all the stuff that you want to break. More power to you. But for myself, this alone is a massive reason that I don't think I could go back to Warhammer 2. And the other reason I couldn't go back to Warhammer 2 is sieges. So sieges in Warhammer 2 sucked, and I conveniently enough have the start recording button key hotkeyed to insert, which as it turns out is the key to start following units. So I'm going to have to fix that between recordings. But either which way, sieges in Warhammer 2 sucked. I know, again, there are some people who like Warhammer 2 sieges specifically because they're easy to cheese. More power to you. But I thought they were abominable. I thought the fact that you were fighting with pretty well this square inch of land here, 2 gates and 70 towers, was a pain in the ass. Thought it was annoying. Thought that there was no actual battle in the city. That was annoying. And don't get me wrong, the sieges in Warhammer 3 aren't perfect. There's still very little reason to hold the walls. And while I enjoy myself some urban combat, I can see why that is annoying for a lot of people. And it's rather silly. I actually intended for this to be me and the ogres on the outside of the walls and Cathay defending. But I actually put them in the wrong order, so I and the ogres am defending the city, though I just took Bellicor, who I've got flying over nothing, and a couple Nurglings sitting on the main capture point. It's actually going to be the ogres doing this, and I'm just going to let them rock while I talk. Here we go. So let me just get rid of all the UI there, so I can just focus on camming the action here. Man, the siege towers look so good. Like, from the visual perspective, from the battle perspective, Warhammer 3 is amazing. And, like, the game doesn't even look that good on my PC. Oh my god, look at that modded unit. The game doesn't even look that amazing on my PC, because, like I said, I can't manage 4K, certainly not while I'm recording. But, that actually leads me to... All that talk doesn't actually lead it to me, but seeing those rockets launch leads me to what I think is still a problem with walled sieges, and, well, sieges in general in this game. Towers are still too strong. Somebody at Crave Assembly, possibly multiple somebodies, possibly the entire team, possibly nobody. I'm not a mind reader and I can't see what's going on in their offices. But somebody at Crave Assembly probably has a fetish for towers. And that is a big part of why, either before this or after this, I'm not sure which, probably before this, when I showed the amount of mods that I have, 2 of them were, one thing, turning off buildable towers, so you can't build towers in town squares like here or whatever, and also lowering the range of wall towers. Because I think they're doofy, I think they're video gamey, I don't like dealing with them from a strategy perspective, I don't like how they discourage the attacker from playing a slow game. All that stuff. And that's pretty well the only problem I've got with sieges and minor settlement battles. Which is incredible. I mean, that's not entirely true, because Cathay is a bit awkward in sieges and minor settlement battles because they're so reliant on tight, packed-together defensive formations. But other than that, like, I've actually been really happy with sieges and minor settlement battles and thought they finally made sieges in Warhammer feel pretty well like the sieges in the rest of Total War do. Obviously, they're not the best sieges ever, because that title still goes to, let's say, Medieval 2 or Shogun 2. Actually, I may be one of the only people who likes Shogun 2 sieges. I don't remember. Either which way, like, the sieges actually feel like a game now, rather than just rush all your assholes onto the wall and go rush them. And I'm sure there's still cheeses here, especially because of the control points, and, oh, look at those nicely modeled Ogre Man-Eaters. Such a good mod. Anyways, like, having actual sieges is, shock of shocks, a massive improvement over having sieges that were so thin and anemic that they pretty well weren't sieges. And there were literally no minor settlement battles. And I know, again, that makes people mad, because they say that minor settlement battles were the only way of getting field battles in Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 1, but really, honestly speaking, guys, how many times did you play the minor settlement battles? Because they'd usually have a nothing garrison that you're better off auto-resolving, unless you've got all the free time in the world. And once you got into the late game, where the AI would actually have enough armies to successfully garrison most of their settlements while still maintaining the war, all the settlements would be walled. Which, I can't speak for everybody, I'm being a bit arrogant here. That's a position to hold. That is definitely a position to hold. But, honestly, I just think it's too doofy going to invade a settlement and you fighting in an open field. And I enjoy minor settlement battles. I think they're a lot of fun. And I think, by the way, these guys are part of the Dead's Cathay, Dead Baron's Cathay unit pack, I believe, in case anyone's curious where those guys come from. But I can't go back, and even still, I tend to get my fair share of field battles just from using the ambush stance to make the AI fight me in fields anyways. So I can't go back. And this is just too good. Getting an actual battle in a settlement. Stuff like this would have never happened in Warhammer 1 or Warhammer 2. It couldn't. Because there were no minor settlement battles, and all the sieges were about 5 inches of city. This just makes me happy to see. Alright. On to the per race finally, on to the per-race talks. Because I actually recorded those before I recorded this. And wound up throwing this in afterwards. So, yeah, on to that part. While I fix this insert button shenanigans. So, the first of the races to hit is naturally the one that I think Crave Assembly kind of expected you to be playing first. Kislev. Which, I think Kislev is one of the best executed. Both from the campaign perspective and the battle perspective. I think from the campaign perspective, they really only have one issue, which is this. For one thing, the Motherland Invocations, I think, is a fun system to work with. I do think that inevitably it boils down to, most of the time, you do the Invocation of Tor, because it makes... No, not Tor, what am I thinking? Dash, there we go. Dash, because it makes you the most money, and you gain a supporter every time you build a building. You're going to be building buildings most of the game. The other invocations all have their benefits, but most of the time in Total War you just want money, because money gets you more dudes. More dudes allows you to cover more real estate. And more money allows you to get more money, which not only leads to more money, it also leads to, again, more dudes. And the other issue I have with invocations is that the game does not teach you how to use them properly. The game encourages you to pop an invocation as soon as possible, using up your starting supply of devotion. Trouble is that when devotion gets low, it summons a chaos invasion. And odds are, at the start of the game, you are not going to be in a position where you will get many supporters out of using an invocation, which means you'll fall behind in the supporter race early on. The supporter race is its own issue. The first problem, of course, being that it's just Cathay and Tzeentch. The game launched with there being a third Kislevite Legendary Lord, and it's not even a spoiler, you can see him on the character select screen. But that third Legendary Lord is not in the race. And the race is present for him still, and he can even, interfere in the race on the behalf of Cathay or Tzeentch, but he doesn't really have much reason to. So, you can just already see that's going to be a problem for future DLC and free DLC Legendary Lord releases for Kislev. Oh, excuse me. Always unprofessional here. That's the specialty. And the supporter race, for one thing, it's kind of one of those situations where they want to add a sense of urgency to it, but at the same time they know you're not losing it. Not unless you deliberately ignore it. You can just keep hobbling Coastal Teen, even though Coastal Teen gets kind of an advantage with his Patriarch buildings throughout the whole game. And the AI inevitably pulls ahead early on because cheats. And the fact that you're tripped up on invocations at first. But you pretty well don't lose it. You pretty well only lose the first leg of the race, but after that, you're guaranteed to win it. The other problem I see with Kislev's campaign is the tech tree, which is, I did really think this was a neat idea, and on some level I think that it can still work. The tech tree is bound, several of the techs, let's see, it is 18 of the techs on the tech tree, which is a not insubstantial amount of techs, are locked depending on city ownership. For Cathay, this is not a problem. She starts out in possession of Kislev, and she can roll up and take Prague pretty quick. Erengrad is in the possession of a neutral faction that I don't believe Constantine or Cathay start at war with. I know Cathay doesn't start out at war with it. The real problem is the aforementioned third Legendary Lord, who starts out in the Darklands. And he can roll over into Kislev and start invading Prague or Kislev. And for people who like to cheese the game and so on, that's probably what you're going to end up doing. It loses you a lot of devotion to... Is it devotion or supporters you lose from declaring war on Kislev as Kislev? I don't know. Either which way, but it's clear that the third Legendary Lord does not fit into the scheme, because Cathay and Coastal Teen both start in much clearly convenient positions to take the cities of Kislev, and the third Legendary Lord does not. And again, that mechanic is going to get increasingly more problematic with the introduction of more and more Kislevite Legendary Lords, which will happen, even if Warhammer 3 doesn't get the support Warhammer 2 did. Now, of course, the other major aspect... Oh, I guess one other thing. This isn't so huge for me, but it can be for some people. The ice court. This is kind of an odd mechanic. It doesn't really feel like you want to use it all that much. And I believe that the amount of ice witches you can get, or ice maidens... There you go, living on a farm. I believe that the amount of ice witches and ice maidens you can get is not tied to buildings like it is for every other race in the game, that you can just build at any city. It is tied to landmarks and technologies. For instance, let's just see here. Ice sculpting, +1 hero capacity for frost maidens. Let's see, +1. Oh, the ice witches are uncapped, okay. But for frost maidens, they are capped. And I believe the maximum amount of frost maidens you can get in the entire campaign is like only 9. And by all means, that's fine for the way I play the game, because I don't try to paint the map, generally. I try to do what I think would lawfully make sense for Kislev, which is reunite Kislev and maybe take Norsca and the Darklands. And for that, 9 Frost Maidens is not going to end the world. But for people who are going to paint the map, even for Warhammer 3's smaller Realms of Chaos map, a limit of 9 Frost Maidens is pretty brutal. Now, it might be a little higher than 9, because when I say it out loud, 9, that sounds absurdly low. Like, here, let me just check. Like, that's 1 Frost Maiden, 2 Frost Maidens, that's an Ice Witch. You only get 2 Frost Maidens from Tex? That makes no sense. That's insane. That can't possibly be right. Hang on, and you get 1 by default, correct? You get 1 Frost Maiden by default. Are there any buildings in Kislev that give you Ice Frost Maiden cap? Oh, I am... Right. You get 1 from the big Kislevite cities. Now, just for the sake of my sanity, just so if I'm wrong, I can be proven wrong on footage for the funnies. Let's see. Give settlement. See, this is the value of the console command mod. I can cheat for the sake of... Oh, boy. They must have changed that console command. Well, anyways. I'm going off of memory, the highly professional device of human memory. You can only get so many like that. And I believe that even in the major settlements outside of Kislev, you can only build the minor settlement buildings, which are like the lumber mill and things like that, which do not give Frost Maiden cap. And if it is... Let me check that just again. 1 capacity for Frost Maiden, and then landmark should... There's a landmark that boosts it, I want to say. It's the... That seems to be about, like... Yeah, 9 may actually be accurate. I thought I was wrong when I was saying that out loud, because that sounds insane. But yeah, you might be only able to get 9 Frost Maidens. Jeez. Yeah, there's some issues on the campaign side they're going to have to fix for the long term for Kislev. This is fine now for the Realms of Chaos campaign, but this is not going to be fine later on. And let's look just real quick at the other important aspect of any given army in Total War, which is the battle roster. I should go ahead and mention here that a couple of these units are modded units. I showed the mods at the start of the video, so this shouldn't be a shock. But just the broad gist of the Kislev roster is lots of... Hang on, what's the technical term? I don't remember what... Hybrid infantry, that's what it is. Lots of hybrid infantry, a lot of fast shock cavalry, a lot of fast skirmish cavalry, and skirmish chariots. I like that a lot. That makes for a really fun, unique battle strategy for Kislev. It's not going to be for everyone. I know for my buddy Soon, it's very much not for him, but I really like it. I like really liquid, high-speed, flexible builds, because I'm actually... Even though I made a couple videos about formation at the... It was about a year ago now, probably. I actually am generally pretty bad about having unique formations at the start of a battle. I tend to just put out lazy formations. And for that, Kislev can be a lot of fun. And for actually making formations, Kislev gets to handle things in a very different way from just about every other race, because their missile units are also melee units. And with the exceptions of the Tsar Guard, their melee units are also missile units, at least from the infantry perspective. So, I think Kislev's one of the better built, because to get on to the positive sides of the campaign of Kislev, because I guess I did go over the negatives but not the positives, I think their building tree is a lot of fun. I think that they get a regular human economy that actually feels a lot more fun compared to the... There's probably going to be people that are mad at me for saying this, but the Empire has a really boring economy. The Empire's building tree is, here's the money building, here's the public order building, here's the growth building. Kislev gets a good couple avenues to invest in from the economic perspective. They got farms, they got markets, and even the growth buildings, they get two choices, one that reduces construction cost and one that reduces growth. Even for their untainted, they get two choices. They can build churches or they can build holy groves. And their structure really encourages you with their high reductions to recruitment cost. I am tongue-tied, but I don't care. I'm doing this in one take, damn you. They are encouraged to have armies that spring up and spend more time without an army and then suddenly recruiting one when they need it, which I think is fun and makes them feel different from the other races. So that's just about how I feel about Kislev. On to Cathay. Cathay, I think, is also pretty good. They haven't wound up being my favorite like I thought they would, though honestly a big part of why I wanted them to be my favorite was because I was just happy to see that they were getting fleshed out after decades of not being really an existential presence in Warhammer lore outside of little tidbits. On the campaign side, I think they're done pretty well, fantastically. I do think that, of course, some of the tech tree techs are a bit lame, though part of why they are so lame is because some of them aren't really there to contribute tech-like benefits. They're mostly there to contribute to your yin and yang. I do find it interesting having to balance yin and yang in the tech tree and every other element of gameplay. I do think there are some odd choices, like the fact that Untainted can only come from two sources. This one technology, I believe. There may be a couple items you can get off the Silk Road. And off the Wuxing Compass, which the Wuxing Compass, in and of itself, I think is a very interesting choice, because there are several decisions you can make here. Generally, I think that right now most people tend towards just pick the Celestial Lake and sit it directly on the Celestial Lake. There's some chaos going on out there. Sit it on the Celestial Lake, not only so you can get the money and growth benefits, because, like the issue with Kislev, money is usually really good, but also so that if you ever need one of the other three directions on the compass, you can suddenly point it in their direction, and you will get those benefits immediately, rather than having to wait for whatever direction you had set it previously to reset before you can switch it to the direction you need. That sounds like a good plan, and honestly that's probably the meta. And Creative Assembly, the DLC team is probably going to have to do some meta busting for a little bit, but it's the nature of the beast, I suppose. Though I definitely think that the Wuxing Compass is better built than Kislev Invocations, at least so far, because at least the other directions are viable. And honestly, for my sake, that's not what I do. I've just been switching between the compass constantly, trying to keep these 3 meters up as much as I can, though I've been kind of ignoring the Great Bastion and switching between Dragon Emperor's Wrath and Celestial Lake. But the fact that it's viable and not just going to screw you, I think is already a pretty nice improvement over some past campaign mechanics in Warhammer. And Total War in general, really. The Silk Road is, of course... Oh, the Ivory Road. It doesn't matter. Well, it's weird that you get a tutorial for the Ivory Road every single time you open it. The Ivory Road is a lot of fun. It just feels satisfying to make money, to see your caravans, my god, your caravans level up and pick up unique exotic foreign troops, and pick up unique exotic foreign equipment for your lords. I think the Ivory Road is a delightful expansion on the, I believe it was the expedition mechanic in Troy, once they added Mythos, but I probably am using the wrong name. The stuff you did in Troy to get access to the Cerberus and the Hydra and the Greater Griffin and so on. The building tree for Cathay, again, I think is fun. I think, like Kislev, they're keeping it to the basic human idea, somewhat of make money mostly directly off the buildings. But like Kislev, they aren't making it where it's just lazily, here's the money building. You have to choose between the Yang building, which just gives you direct amount of money, a high amount of money, or the Yin building, which gives you less money, but increases your income from trade, which will differ depending on what kind of position you're in. For instance, as Miao Ying, you probably don't have as many strong diplomatic connections as Zhao Ming does, so you might want to tend more towards the Yang side of economy, while Zhao Ming definitely wants the trade money, because Zhao Ming, I may be wrong about this, but Zhao Ming gets stronger diplomacy landmarks and easier access to the more western states of the warmer world. And so on for growth as well. I don't see any real obvious problems here other than just some of the boring stuff like, there's not much difference between the two control buildings, honestly. Not really meaningful stuff, because they both just buff peasant units nearby, which is nice for having big peasant armies or suddenly needing to build big peasant armies in a bad situation. But because Cathay has the Grand Bastion, which you see rolling around the top here, that's not as much of a necessity for Cathay as it is for Kislev to have armies that you can summon up out of nowhere. The Great Bastion is, of course, the other main mechanic with Cathay. I cannot say that I put a huge amount of time into the Great Bastion as Cathay. Most of my time as Cathay was with Zhao Ming. And so I have heard things about the way it is. Specifically, I hear things about the Kurgan being a real issue. But I'm sure that if there are issues, there will eventually be balance patches or mods that deal with it. But if you have an issue with it, then I don't know. That's one I'll just have to throw up my hands and say, I don't know. The Cathay roster is kind of where I got lost a little bit. And again, I have modded units, so ignore some of these. But the Cathay roster is very defense heavy, which can be fun, but it's a bit slow, a bit defense heavy. Similar to the dwarfs, and I wasn't super into that with the dwarfs. But with the dwarfs it could be fun because your units were very tough. Cathay's units are not very tough. So it's a very different kind of situation there. And I think that I could come to really enjoy Cathay, but I'm going to have to put more time in with them to really get the formula down. Because a lot of the matches that I have played as Cathay, I have watched my front line melt. But nonetheless, they do have some really cool, fun units to use, and I think Cathay is going to benefit from DLC a lot, as the DLC will probably expand on the Harmony mechanic. In particular, like right now, I have a modded unit of Peasant Horse Archers, because that gives Cathay more viability for a cavalry-focused build. To have these Yin Horse Archers comboed with the Yang Jade Lancers. I think, obviously there is possibilities there to combine, let's say, the Jade Lancers with the Sky Lantern. And I think that a big part of why the Sky Lantern even exists, even though it's got Sky Lantern's a bit odd with some of its functions, and seems for a lot of people like it does nothing. But I think that a big part of why it exists is for you to combo it with oddball units like the Jade Lancers or the Longma Riders or the Terracotta Sentinel, which you may want to have fighting apart from the rest of your army. And that's pretty much the gist of what I've got to say about Cathay, other than saying I'm very happy with the lore we've got for them and the visuals we've got for them. It seems to largely fit with Warhammer. I think that there are some things that are a bit different and a bit odd right now that don't feel like they quite fit, but the thing with Cathay is, frankly, right now we're only seeing about half of Cathay altogether, right? Because we're only seeing the northern provinces, the western provinces, and seemingly about half of the central provinces. And we're missing out on the rest of the central provinces, as well as the Jade Dragon, plus the eastern provinces, the southern provinces, and the Celestial Mountains, where there's going to be the Monkey King, who will definitely be important. So we're missing out on a big chunk of Cathay lore here right now. Makes it very different from everything else we've gotten in Warhammer so far, because even though, Warhammer 2 launched with only Queek and Skrulk as legendary lords for the Skaven, and we were missing some of the major great clans, you could still go online and read the lore, and you'd be exposed to the rest of Skaven lore and see them fleshed out. But for Cathay right now, the rest of the lore isn't out for anyone to consume. There's what you can pick up from the Andy Hall interviews, but Andy, for good reason, has been deliberately, a bit more secretive to preserve the mystery. So, some of that stuff, and I will get to this later, some of the stuff in general with Warhammer 3 that I think you need to judge on is stuff that we have not seen yet, and will probably not see for a while, because we have observed with Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2 and pretty well every Total War game since Rome 2, the game you get at the end and the game you get at the beginning are very different beasts. And on to the next one, which should be, I think Ogres are the appropriate next one before we hit all the Chaos guys. That sounds reasonable. So the Ogres, I think, are the best ones, both from the campaign perspective and to a lesser degree from the battle perspective. I think that there's a bit more width and breadth on the battle perspective, whereas from the campaign perspective, I think there's only one race that's clearly lagging behind the others. The Ogres, from the campaign perspective, I think are really fun. They handled the way that the Ogres are both a sedentary and migratory people in the lore really well by having it where they could occupy settlements, but they can only go up to tier 3, while they can build the camps, which go up to tier 5. That, I think, is part of a wider recognition in Total War Warhammer's development that Creative Assembly has realized that full, pure hordes do not necessarily work in Total War Warhammer, particularly with reoccupation being so easy. And we saw that near the end of Warhammer 2 with the changes to Beastmen, that being that Beastmen kind of became a little bit of a settled faction with the addition of Herdstones, and the Ogres are a further development on that, where they can occupy every single settlement, but they're not great settlements, but they can leave the camps, which are almost like Black Arcs that can't move and are stuck on the land. But like Black Arcs, the Ogres do want to use for recruitment and the heavier economic duties. From the tech tree perspective, they have a really fun tech tree, a lot of cool additions or stuff that just makes them strong. They have the camp upgrades that are really nice. It makes it feel like the Ogres really pick up power and momentum as the game goes on and gets stronger, which can be important in Total War campaigns because even though the AIs individually do not frequently get that strong in the late campaign, it can often come to pass in the campaign that the longer the campaign goes on, the more enemies you make. The meat thing, I think, is a bit of an odd mechanic. I think that sacrificing to the Maw actually wound up being more of a mechanic than at least I expected, because the units take up a lot of meat early in the game when you don't have too many camps and the Lord isn't too upgraded and so on. But as the game goes on, the meat mechanic in terms of meat consumption more or less goes away. Which I'm fine with because, honestly, the Ogres only really need meat to hold them back in the early game when the other race rosters do not have such easy access to monsters as they do. And but even in that regard, the Ogres already kind of are held back because Greasus starts out fighting fellow Ogres who have the exact same access to monsters that he does, and Scrag starts out fighting the entirety of the Empire by his lonesome. The Ogre roster is, again, I think the Ogre roster is probably the best in the game, unless you want to count the Chaos Demons Undivided, which I wouldn't because they're kind of cheating. They are pretty well entirely fleshed out. They're only missing the Thunder Tusks and Yetis, I want to say. They may be missing one extra unit. I don't think Blood Vultures were ever part of the tabletop roster officially. But other than that, they feel like a really fully fleshed out roster where you have lots of different choices, lots of different avenues to go down. It doesn't feel like there's a threat the Ogres can go up against that they don't have some kind of counter to. And it does feel like the Ogres have one or two units that are perhaps a bit too strong. I believe Gorgers and Iron Blasters both got nerfed recently, which, thank God. But I think right now, when Immortal Empires releases, a lot of the Warhammer 3 races are actually going to have a lot of trouble keeping up with the Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2 races. I think the Ogres are going to be able to keep up fine. I think the Ogres right now are almost comparable to the Empire, the High Elves, the Greenskins, the Skaven, in terms of the mass amount of unit selection and flexibility. And they're all just visually gorgeous and feel fun to use. And the Mountains of Morn is a fun little area of the map. I think the Ogres wound up fantastic. And on to the first of the Chaos Gods, Khorne. Khorne, I think, is the best off out of the Chaos Gods. I actually wanted to use Scarbrand's star position to demonstrate how I tend to get bad performance in some areas of the campaign map. But strangely enough, I'm actually getting pretty good performance here. It is noticeable that I'm running at a pretty low resolution. I generally ran Warhammer 2 in 4K, though I use the resolution scaling feature to tone it down a little bit. Warhammer 3, I do not get that same luxury, even if I use the resolution scaling to tone the resolution down 50%. 4K is still too much for my PC to handle. That is unfortunate. I am hoping that Warhammer 2's DCL... Well, it's probably still Warhammer 2's DLC team working on Warhammer 3. But I hope the Warhammer 3 DLC team has some performance-fixing magic. I don't know how that stuff works. Of course, I'm not a programmer. This could all be very infantile stuff. This could be me asking for, a magician to rain chocolate chip cookies down from the sky. But I hope there's something that can be done. On for Khorne himself. Khorne is kind of in a weird position. I think all 4 of the Chaos races are in awkward positions because all 4 of them between them only have a Legendary Lord each. So the start position and the Legendary Lord can affect a lot of how you view a given race. Scarbrand is, without a doubt, the single strongest unit in Total War Warhammer, if not Total War history altogether. The man is insane. And when you look at the benefits he gets, armies replenish in foreign territory, plus 25% campaign movement range after raising a settlement. Scarbrand is insane. You face roll the entire map for pretty well the entire campaign. Every other race has a bit of issues with the anti-player bias. Scarbrand laughs at it. That makes for a hilariously fun campaign. I never thought I would thoroughly enjoy Khorne, because I've always felt Khorne was the most boring of the Chaos Gods. But Scarbrand makes Khorne hilarious. And the Khorne roster is a load of fun. Total War Warhammer has always been very pro-missile, very pro-ranged combat, and yet Khorne is insane. Khorne brutalizes pretty well everyone at the start of the game, except maybe, Ogres. And I've not seen Khorne versus Ogres at the start of the game. I can say, for any of the races where you have to fight Khorne at first, cough, cough, Nakari, it sucks. Khorne is absurdly strong. Bloodletters are, without a doubt, the single strongest Tier 1 unit in the game. Even Tzeentch doesn't get access to his pink ores at Tier 1. Khorne gets access to his Bloodletters at Tier 1. They're insane. They will just shred everything else in the game. And I'll get to my issues with Nakari in a second. But it means that Scarbrand, I think, is probably one of the best beginner campaigns in Warhammer 3. Him and Zhao Ming, I think, are the 2 best, because Scarbrand is insane. But it makes for a fun campaign because of the insanity. And it's going to be interesting once we see extra Legendary Lords come out for Khorne that perhaps make Khorne seem less invincible than he does now, at least in the early game. You add all the strong roster stuff on top of Khorne's mechanic also of getting free armies from raising settlements, and Khorne gets really nuts. Especially if you're fighting Khorne, because it seems like there's no end to the hordes of Bloodletters. Khorne feels like one of the most aggressive, outnumber you horde races possible, which is insane because he's a demon, and demons aren't supposed to be that cheap. So, Khorne could maybe use a bit toning down on the campaign side, honestly. The Unholy Manifestation system, I like the idea of systems that encourage you to play into the late game and reward you for playing into the late game. One of the biggest problems Total War Warhammer 2 had was there was very little reason, a lot of the time, to go past turn 60, other than because you felt like it. Because it felt like you dealt with a lot of your early issues, and then from there on, it didn't look like there was a whole lot of new stuff to try, a whole lot of new toys to try past that point, and a lot of the threats that you were going to face were not that interesting. So I think one of the big focuses of Warhammer 3 was to try and encourage the player to play into the late game more, which I will say I actually beat the Realm of Chaos campaign in Warhammer 3, which I never beat any of the campaigns in Warhammer 2. So on some level they succeeded, though that one I think is cheating because I didn't do it so much because I felt encouraged to. I did it because you have to beat the game to unlock Be'lakor. The Unholy Manifestations, I think, are one of the bigger examples of this philosophy of encourage the player to play more into the late game. I like encouraging the Chaos races to spread their corruption and actually play the great game. That, I think, is really cool. I think one of the most fascinating things about Chaos is its internal struggles. However, I do think that the second Unholy Manifestation perhaps comes a bit too late. I think that the fact that for every Chaos race, you start out with just the first Unholy Manifestation, and for a good long time, that's the only one you get. And more often than not, it's not a terribly interesting one. Khorne gets a cool one. I like this one, though the cooldown's too big. But for the other Chaos gods, especially Slaanesh, the first Unholy Manifestation you get sucks. And you don't get access to the second or third ones, and God help you, the fourth one, until much later in the game, which feels like a pity, because they are damn fascinating mechanics. The great game, for its part, I don't even know how that shit works. But I do love how Khorne's mechanics were implemented here. The bloodletting and the skulls and the skull throne offering, and how settling requires you to spin skulls. So Khorne is encouraged to not try and build an empire like the other races would, which is lawful. But instead, he destroys everything, and a worship of his destruction develops in his wake. That is a very, 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 very cool way of handling Khorne. And I was saying that as soon as the blogs came out for him. Khorne, from pretty well all the campaign perspective, I think, except for the Unholy Manifestations, has been handled brilliantly. He just needs a bit of toning down. Or perhaps Skarbrand, they can just let him continue to be crazy, overpowered, because he is so much fun, and he is so much easier on new players. But for the next couple Khorne Legendary Lords, Skulltaker or Valkia or whoever, maybe give them a bit more to have to work against than what Skarbrand sees. On the roster side, Khorne has some nice kick-your-ass kind of units. I'm a big fan of shock cavalry. I like how mean and aggressive his melee infantry is. I like some good monstrous infantry and artillery and chariots. But Khorne, like all of the Chaos Gods right now, suffers from just not having enough. Khorne right now really only gets aggressive infantry, aggressive cavalry, aggressive monsters. He could use something else to do. I know with Khorne, their hands are kind of tied because Khorne in the lore is not the most subtle guy in the planet, and he mostly prefers to just get in your face and kick the ever-living shit out of you. But I think Khorne does need something else to do. And on that perspective, I do not envy Creative Assembly having to come up with something. And it's pretty much all I got thoughts on for Khorne. So I'll move on to the next one, Tzeentch. So I don't want to talk about Tzeentch for too long, as I've put enough time in with him that I think I can talk about him a bit, but it's only about a 30 to 40 turn campaign, so I don't think I can speak too definitively on him. The Unholy Manifestation stuff and Great Game stuff is broadly similar to Khorne. I do like the little bit of lore building, world building kind of thing here of having your armies stop to write a bunch of books, because that's very Tzeentchy. But in terms of that, that's otherwise broadly similar to Khorne, except for what the Unholy Manifestations do. The tech tree, from the little bit I've experienced of it, does seem to be the weakest of the tech trees. That is one of the big changes going from Warhammer 2 to Warhammer 3, because Warhammer 2 tech trees were generally pretty strong. The tech trees are not generally my expertise. That is more of a thing for the cheesers. And generally speaking, I don't aim for that OP of tech trees. It's not necessarily what I want from the game. There are some tech tree entries I do really like. I like, for instance, the Empire tech tree bit in Warhammer 2 that gives halberdiers expert charge defense. I think that tech tree entries that give you new things to do with units rather than just making them better is interesting. I do like that Tzeentch's powers, professional as always, are stuck behind the tech tree. I think that very strongly encourages you as Tzeentch to focus on your tech tree, and Tzeentch should be focused on his tech tree. He's focused on knowledge. That's how he is. And of course the changing of the ways mechanic, very creative, very fun. Well, I wouldn't say creative, but it's very fun. I hear it's a pain in the ass when the AI uses it on you. I can't say I've ever had an AI Tzeentch faction use it on me other than Halt faction, which by all means was annoying, but I don't play on legendary difficulty, so I'm rarely in a position where a single turn dictates the entirety of a war. Especially because, generally speaking, I try not to leave armies too isolated, especially if you're going against Tzeentch. In terms of Tzeentch's roster, I didn't get to spend a whole lot of time with it, but Tzeentch's roster did seem like, to me, it was the most immediately interesting one out of the Demon rosters, other than Demons Undivided, obviously, because Demons Undivided just gets access to everything, and ignore this guy who's a modded unit. But other than that, the Tzeentch roster, I think, is really fun because, of course, the classic Tzeentch way to do it is spam pink horrors everywhere, just fireballs everywhere, light everybody on fire. But the shield mechanic that Tzeentch gets access to makes the Knights of Tzeentch and the Doom Knights of Tzeentch really fun to use as shock cavalry, as cycle charging shock cavalry. And I am a cavalry fiend, especially for shock cavalry. So I'm very happy to see that. And I think Tzeentch has some really cool monsters. Flamers are hilariously strong. They are a delight to use. So Tzeentch is actually one I've not put much time into because, oh, excuse me, never record right after eating or during eating. I'm not gonna stop doing that. I'm gonna keep recording while I eat and recording after eating. But tip for everyone else, especially if you're as much of a gassy son of a bitch as I am, don't do that. Do as I say, not as I do. Tzeentch, honestly, I should play Tzeentch more. I should put more time in with him. But obviously I haven't had much time the last 3 months since the game released because of college and things. But Tzeentch, I think, is generally pretty good. As much as any of the other races, he will benefit from the additions of DLC and free DLC. But honestly, out of the Chaos races, I think outside of AI Tzeentch doing annoying things to the player, I think Tzeentch is the least troublesome of the Chaos races right now. And the next one I'll move on to is Nurgle. I think that's natural. So, Nurgle, I think, is the most troubled race in the game. And I don't think that's a very controversial take. I think Nurgle is the biggest example of Creative Assembly's plan to encourage the player to play more in the late game, play more past turn 60, finish the game more often, which I cannot blame them. And obviously I'm not a mind reader, so I could be wrong about any of this, but that does seem to be the case. Nurgle is entirely reliant from the campaign perspective on the Plague Cauldron. He does have some stuff from the Unholy Manifestations, let's see, but as with the other Unholy Manifestations, you don't really get access to it until the late game. The Plague Cauldron, like the Unholy Manifestations, is late game reliant. You have to spread plagues to get plagues. The plague that you're going to be using the most in the early game is the pox, so you're going to unlock its symptoms real quick. But the other plagues, you're not going to use so much in the early game. It won't be till the late game you start prioritizing them. And some of them, like, I'll be honest, the Nurgling one, I never really saw much reason to use it, at least as Kugath. It seems like you get Nurglings constantly. And I wasn't letting that many units die, honestly, because Nurgle has such poor recruitment and replenishment that you can't afford to throw lives away needlessly. And, of course, the bottom symptoms here you only get from techs, and some of those are deeper in the tech tree than others. Let's see. Yeah. And the other thing about the Plague Cauldron is, in addition to having to unlock more symptoms, have more options for what to do, a lot of the value of the Plague Cauldron mechanic is the Plague Spreading mechanic, which is RNG reliant. Some degree of RNG has always been in Total War, but I don't think any race's central mechanic has relied so thoroughly on RNG as the Plague Cauldron does. And the idea is that you can get to the end of the tree and pick up all those plague techs, plus throw in the plague symptoms that increase the chance of plague spreading, and once you stack all those up, the plague becomes virtually guaranteed to spread. However, the circumstances under which a plague even seems transmissible does not seem innately clear. That might be in one of those tooltip little hints, and I just didn't see it. That might have been part of the YouTube build-up or Total War blog build-up to the game, and I just didn't see it. In which case, I will concede I should have seen that. But the game does not build the plagues in such a way that it seems intuitive. I know that if you start a battle, you will spread a plague, but Nurgle's units do not seem expendable enough to do that, because his recruitment and replenishment is generally pretty bad. Maybe just sending out a single horde of Nurglings infected with the plague could work. I haven't tried that, but the Plague Cauldron seems a little too late game reliant. And that, on top of Nurgle's bizarre building tree and the fact that he has to build up units over time rather than recruiting them as soon as he gets access to them. And Nurgle's growth, I think, is generally pretty weird. His access to heroes is definitely weird. As well as the fact that the early units Nurgle gets access to are not bad units, but Kugath is the only start position that Nurgle gets right now. And he starts next to Ogres and Dwarfs, who are both bad opponents for Nurgle, especially in the early game. You throw all this together, Nurgle feels like Kugath feels like he just needs to camp out in his starting province for the first 60 turns until he can actually do something. And I'm sure there's a better way of doing things, a strategy that makes Nurgle a lot more viable, but I haven't seen it, and it's not terribly intuitive like it can be for virtually every other race. I think Nurgle, like Slaanesh, will really benefit from another start position. And honestly, Demons Undivided too. All three of those races, I haven't got to Slaanesh, and I won't get to Demons Undivided because, like I said, I haven't put like more than 5 turns in with them. But each of the 3 races suffer from the issue that they only have one start position, and the start position is in a pretty brutal place. And for Nurgle, that is, Nurgle has no anti-large, he starts out fighting Ogres. Nurgle is reliant on grinding the opponent down and nullifying all of their major sources of damage dealing. Nurgle, after hitting the Ogres, is almost certainly going to be fighting the Dwarfs, who are around here, I believe. The Dwarfs don't really do much damage at all. They rely on grinding the opponent down and ignoring their sources of damage. So Kugath gets the unfortunate position of being put against seemingly Nurgle's 2 best counters. At least for this early stage of development, where this leads to the next thing. Nurgle's roster is the tiniest. By far. He makes the other Chaos races look like they have massive rosters. And he gets no anti-large tools, so he has trouble taking on Ogres. And he doesn't really have... Does he have armor piercing on Plague Bearers? He does not. Access to armor piercing does not seem too terribly hot. They're the Beasts of Nurgle, at least, and the Rotflies, so that's not bad. But Nurgle's not really drowning in armor piercing, especially in the early game, when a lot of what he's going to be doing is just Nurglings, Plague Bearers, and Furies. Yes, Furies. 3 units that do not have access to armor piercing, and he gets thrown against the Dwarfs. a lot of the races that end up fighting dwarfs early generally have better armor piercing to begin with than that. So, Nurgle right now, he already seems to have campaign mechanics that are a lot weaker than every other race. But you throw on top of that Kugath, I think, has possibly the most... No, I wouldn't say that. The third or fourth most difficult start position. And I think that Nurgle is being looked at as even weaker than what he actually is. And I think that's an odd choice for Crave Assembly to make. Considering Nurgle, I would say, is probably the most popular Chaos God competing with Khorne. So, Nurgle, I can tell he's going to be fun once they put some more work on him. Because I have had a lot of fun playing some Nurgle battles and just doing the old Death Star build that used to be strong with the vampire counts back in Warhammer 1 and just hitting the opponent with a tide of Nurglings and Plague Bearers that they can't do damage to. That's fun. It just feels like Nurgle's not got much else to do. And there are some real threats that Nurgle doesn't have much of an answer for. So, I think Nurgle is definitely the one who needs the most love out of the Warhammer 3 races right now. And for the next one I'll hit, process of elimination, it's Slaanesh. And Slaanesh, I think, is a bit similar to Nurgle in one specific way, which is that he seems, she seems, whichever way you want to refer to Slaanesh. For the sake of my sanity, I'll go with they. Or maybe I'll just use interchangeable terms. That's fine. So, Slaanesh, I think, comes off a little bit weaker than she really should relative to her campaign mechanics and his battle roster, because Slaanesh starts out in the unfortunate position of, well, being stuck in a corner is often good in Total War because it means there's a couple borders you don't have to worry about protecting. N'Kari starts out in their start position right next to Skarbrand. And you start out at war with Skarbrand, as you can see right here. And because of anti-player bias, Skarbrand will focus from the beginning of the game on dropping everything and going after you. And Skarbrand, as I said earlier, is the single baddest motherfucker in the game. And while it's fun playing that guy, it ain't fun playing against that guy. And I'm sure that there's lots of people out there who can beat him real easy and are very good at Total War. I am not those people. Or at least I'm not good enough with Slaanesh's campaign mechanics and battle roster yet to consistently beat Skarbrand off and not find it incredibly annoying and incredibly stressful. So, that's why I said earlier that I started cheating and just nuking Skarbrand off the face of the earth as soon as I saw him with console commands. Outside of that, once I started getting rid of Skarbrand, I thought the Slaanesh campaign was quite a bit of fun. I think Slaanesh does a better job of being built for the late campaign than Kugath does, than Nurgle does. Because Slaanesh has several mechanics, like, let's see here. Slaanesh has the, oh, hello, Eagle Steer Bjorn. I forgot I had Mixu's Legendary Lords on. Nurgle, my god, I'm getting mixed up. Slaanesh has the Seductive Influence mechanic, which is really cool, but you really shouldn't focus on building up until the late game, because it requires quite a bit of investment of money and Slaanesh's unique resource, devotees, to really get off the ground, but it is rewarding once you get it done, because diplomacy is so much better in Warhammer 3. And it has, I guess I should I'll probably, you know what, it occurs to me, I didn't record anything to talk about diplomacy or some of the other upsides of the game. I've actually mostly been talking about the downsides of the game. I'll record a different segment and cut it in earlier. That's how editing works. My god. Why wasn't I doing this the whole time? Anyways, that's a cool mechanic, but Slaanesh should not focus on using that Seductive Influence mechanic until later. But Slaanesh gets some earlier game mechanics, right? Of course, Slaanesh has Unholy Manifestations, but like I said, that's a pretty late game mechanic. Slaanesh gets the devotees, which Slaanesh can immediately use to spawn a devotee or a disciple army whenever Slaanesh is in a bad situation, and Slaanesh cannot deal with it with the forces that Slaanesh has immediate access to. But most of the time you'll be using devotees to proliferate cults and to build cult buildings in your cults within the various settlements. Cults are a mechanic that all the Chaos Gods have, but for Slaanesh it's really important and it's pretty fun. It feels like you're building up power and corrupting the old world. Well, the whole of the Warhammer world, at least that's depicted in this campaign, is going to be crazy when World Empires come out, and you can corrupt all of Ulthuan and so many other places. God help. You put in the old versus new mod, you can corrupt Araby and Albion. It's going to be nuts. But it builds up for a very well done structure, I say. And over the course of Slaanesh's campaign, it feels like you're building up power and your reach over the world is growing. The only problem I have with Slaanesh from a campaign perspective, aside from the fact that Nakari's start position is unnecessarily brutal, which makes Slaanesh feel weaker than Slaanesh really should, is the... hang on. Let me look at it. The Gift of Slaanesh mechanic, which you can see here is one of the things that gives devotees. So the Gift of Slaanesh mechanic, for those who don't know, is if you beat an army and let the people run away, they will be marked with the Gift of Slaanesh, which causes you to receive devotees, as well as making them easier to beat the next time you fight, and also increasing your seductive influence over that faction. That is a really cool mechanic that Slaanesh should totally have. However, I think that a lot of the time it doesn't work because there are just situations where you're going to wipe the enemy army out no matter what, especially in auto-resolve, because auto-resolve there are rarely, if ever, survivors. But even if you fight the battle manually, Slaanesh's mechanics, his unique battle racial mechanics, where he builds up meter and gets abilities like Fascination, rewards him for not letting people go and get away. Slaanesh is really encouraged to get after her enemies and kill them, and not let anyone get away. And on some level, I think that's a very interesting idea, because it makes the player choose between, okay, do I want the advantage in battles, or do I want the advantage in campaign? Am I willing to sacrifice the advantage I get in this battle from wiping out fleeing enemies and getting access to new abilities in exchange for advantages in campaign? Or do I want to do the reverse? Does not usually work out that way, sadly. Usually, when you're in the battle, things, at least for me, maybe I'm just too easily stressed by this game. I have too much anxiety for getting that vaunted decisive victory or heroic victory title from the game, but I am pretty well never going to sacrifice a battle advantage for a campaign advantage. Probably if you're like some kind of Total War pro, it's a much easier choice to make. But for me, I am worried that I'll lose even the most basic battles. And on some level, I think that's an anxiety thing, but I think that is also something to consider from a game development standpoint of that is a mechanic, a deliberate mechanic part of Slaanesh that every Slaanesh player should be making a choice on. I think from the development perspective that I and people who are like me are not going to make a choice on that matter. It is not a binary decision. It is a just make this choice. Just do the same thing every time. And again, that may be a personal issue, so I'm not really bothered if they never change it. But if they do at one point decide to change it, I would be really struggling to think how they could change it to make it more of a choice, more of a tempting choice, while still retaining the spirit of the mechanic. And in terms of battle roster, Slaanesh, I like Slaanesh's whole game. Slaanesh is a lot of very fast, very aggressive units, very fast infantry, very fast cavalry, very fast monsters, very fast chariots. That is all very me. However, it does feel like Slaanesh is largely locked into just hammer and anvil, get after them, put some marauders on their front, and then put some demonettes or some seekers or some fiends on their flank. And I do think that that is something that could stand to see a bit of change. I'm sure there's some variety in these races that I've not seen yet because I've not got to spend that much time with them. As I've said, my schedule was quite busy, and my busy was also quite schedule. But it does seem like Slaanesh is kind of stuck into a pigeonhole the same way that Khorne and Cathay and Nurgle all seem to be stuck in pigeonholes. However, that is virtually guaranteed to change. Because I would say by the end of Warhammer 2's development, the only race that was really pigeonholed was the Dwarfs, with a less, maybe you could argue for the Warriors of Chaos a bit, but we'll be seeing an update for them soon. But the Dwarfs were a bit pigeonholed, but the last update for Warhammer 2 massively overhauled the Dwarfs. And that last update made the Dwarfs a very different race in battle perspective. They could still do their old stuff, but the addition of runic magic and making hammers so much stronger on offense really made the Dwarfs more flexible and have more variety, and variety is the spice of life. So Slaanesh could use a bit of that, though I couldn't exactly point out where. Especially because, and this is the thing with all the Chaos races, they've kind of already got pretty well every actual unit from the tabletop they could, outside of a couple oddball Forge World units. And I'm sure that each of the demon races are going to see the addition of more Warriors of Chaos type units. But there's very little room for predictable additions to the 4 Chaos races. What will be added, I think, will be mostly stuff that is surprising. Outside of, like I said, maybe some Forge World stuff, maybe some End Time stuff, maybe some Warriors of Chaos stuff. With that said, that is the last of the little looking into the race aspects, and I think I'm just going to go ahead and move on to the end bit after this, unless I change the order of things in editing. Ooh. Cut. So yeah, to wrap it all up, I'm probably going to repeat myself a fair bit here, but I know Warhammer 3 is a flawed game, and there have certainly been a couple points in this video. I think most of the points where I actually talk about the individual races, I kind of accentuated the negative. And there were times where I skipped over the positive. And I probably shouldn't have done that. But that's just kind of the environment that this video is being uploaded in. And as a matter of fact, honestly, that might be good. Because I think that there's a good chance, and people are going to, some people might hear this and think I'm being a bit arrogant. But I think there's a good chance that in a year, maybe even a few months, that the narrative on Warhammer 3 is going to change entirely. Warhammer 2 launched in a pretty rough state. Warhammer 1 launched in a pretty rough state. Warhammer 3 launched in a pretty rough state. But each game continued to get more praise and more positivity surrounding it as the DLC team got to grips with each game. And I don't think Warhammer 3 launched necessarily as happily as Warhammer 2 did. But keep in mind, we don't know what goes on at Creative Assembly with the main team or the DLC team. Especially with COVID going on. We don't know what communication is like. We don't know what the work environment is like. We don't know what they're asked to do, what the corporate environment is like. But generally speaking, I think Warhammer 3 is going to benefit a lot from having the DLC team overlooking it. I mean, if the DLC team made the Ogre Kingdoms, which they might have. They've made pre-order DLCs in the past, I believe. Well, they might not have made the Warriors of Chaos, but they definitely made Norska. The Ogre Kingdoms are fucking fantastic. So I think with Warhammer 3, I understand people being a bit mad with the game now, though I think some of the complaints are unreasonable. I think there are too many people that are complaining just that the game doesn't have Karl Franz yet, which is... But I feel like an idiot saying this, but on some level, the game is already good, I would say. And the game is going to be great once Immortal Empires comes, which it is coming. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, it's 3 Kingdoms all over again, Creative Assembly's going to cut and run, torch and burn. But Immortal Empires is coming. Warhammer 3 sold like gangbusters. The player count has gone down now because it's not gotten updated as fast as everybody expected it to, and because for about a month, there was such an instance of people on YouTube and people on Reddit shitting on it. But I do think that in a few months to a year, especially once Immortal Empires drops, we are going to see the narrative change here, and this video, among many others, I'm sure, including a variety of ones by other YouTubers, as opposed to the videos by something other than YouTube, because there's a monopoly these days. But I think this video will perhaps be a bit of an artifact of a bygone time, especially in 5 or 6 years, once Warhammer 3's DLC cycle is done, and it features all the content from Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2 unambiguously, as well as the countless mods. The idea that Warhammer 3 was ever a game that there was a very negative attitude towards, and dare I say it, a circle jerk towards, I think may be an antiquated thought. Now, with that said, knock on wood, ideally I won't look like a complete fool, and in a year from now, all they add to Warhammer 3 is like giant flopping penises everywhere, and then everyone in Krev Assembly commits ritual suicide, and then their blood, they draw out the words fuck. Gotta try and write it backwards for the camera here. Alex. There you go. That's what they'll write out with their blood there. So, and I mean, for the future DLC, I mean, I'll probably be making lots of videos on that as it comes, because that's who I am. I'm obsessed with these games. And now that I've got the free time to be obsessed with them again, I'm probably going to be making more videos about the game. But immediately, it does seem like who even knows what's coming in May, right? Well, it's May now, but who knows what's coming later this week, actually. It's actually good that I'm getting this video done today, because odds are tomorrow or the next day or the next, it's going to be possibly made to look silly even then, because there's going to be big updates for the balance, which the game needs. And there's something going on with Feral Interactive accidentally released a map of the Realm of Chaos campaign with Khorne and Albion added? Curious. Very curious. So, there's a very long-winded video saying very little. A lot of subjective takes and a lot of whining about people whining. Sorry you had to sit through it. But nonetheless, I hope that perhaps some of you sadists or masochists enjoyed it. And I hope to see you next time, I guess. It's been a while. Sorry about that.